Hi, I'm Tim Muldoon, and I'm coming to you live from my backyard, like you, in the midst of dealing with this pandemic. Finally have a lovely day. In fact, lost power yesterday, but making do as my family and I can in the midst of the chaos. And I thought this might be the right time to talk a little bit about Ignatian mindfulness, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But the basic idea that I thought it would be helpful to reflect on is that all of us around the world, in fact, are trying to make do in very unusual circumstances. And a lot of our plans have changed. Many of the things that we had thought we would be doing on a normal day have been upended. We're trying to navigate video conferencing, or we're trying to navigate how to get groceries. Some of us in very dire circumstances are trying to manage in the face of uncertainty about jobs, income insecurity. And so there are real issues that we're all facing. So my small part in this is to share a little bit about the work that I've been doing for the past 15 years as an author in Ignatian spirituality, as a professor, as a teacher, as somebody who has led people through the spiritual exercises. Because what strikes me is that this tradition enables us to really kind of have a toolkit for how to deal with not only big issues, but to call ourselves to some kind of maybe a centeredness is the way to describe it, a way of just recalling that there are ways that we can experience God's grace in everyday life, ways that we might actually rush by when we're normally busy and going through our normal routines. In fact, one of the things that I've written about is the fact that we live very hurried up lives, particularly those of us who live in the West, and tend to be driven by the news cycle and the business cycle, all the things that kind of occupy our time and energy and our money, and occupy our desires and our dreams. And so what strikes me is that, particularly in the tradition of Ignatian spirituality, and this is the spirituality that comes from St. Ignatius of Loyola, we have this remarkable, I think of it as a way of calling ourselves to a particular kind of attentiveness. So that word mindfulness, it's become kind of modern. Certainly in the last few years, it's all the rage in Silicon Valley, for example. It's become quite an element of corporate speak, and a lot of treatments of just kind of calling ourselves to maybe meditate a little bit more, or engage in some practices that kind of help us to deal in the moment. So I think much of that is good. And in fact, I rely on some of it. I think specifically of the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley. Cal Berkeley has a wonderful resource for drawing insights from positive psychology, for example. So there are resources out there, but it strikes me that there's a particular Ignatian angle to this. And those of you that are familiar with Ignatian spirituality certainly know this. And even if you're not, though, I want to introduce you to a specific practice that maybe will help you to refocus your day. Now, a quick disclaimer. You don't have to be Catholic. You don't even have to be Christian to draw from this tradition. Obviously, if you are one of those things, Christian or maybe Catholic, then you're going to do it in a particular way, and that's good. But let me speak to people just wherever you are, and just suggest to you that a prayer that's known as the Examen is one that is a particular tool from the Ignatian tradition that you might find useful in your day. It may be a way of calling yourself specifically to think about God or the way that God is present to you, or more broadly, it might be a way to just remind yourself that there's life to be lived in the moment, regardless of whatever issues we're dealing with. And it may be all of those things that I mentioned at the top of this little video. And it might be just simply that, it's good to breathe deeply and to take a few minutes to ourselves in the middle of a busy day. So let me give you an image, all right? And it's going to be a sort of obvious one, but it's to kind of situate what I'm suggesting. Imagine that you're on the way to an appointment. Now, of course, you have to remember that we used to do these things before the world turned crazy, all right? But let's just say, for example, that you were going to an appointment and you're running and you have to check your watch and you're thinking to yourself, ooh, I better get moving. And lo and behold, you drive by a field of roses and you speed on by in order to get to your appointment. Yes, that was me saying, aha, you should stop and smell the roses. Okay, now, in normal life, we don't do that, all right? But this situation, and again, even if you are let's say a doctor on the front lines, or a nurse, or a healthcare professional. Maybe you are a grocer. Maybe you are a truck driver, or a lorry driver if you're in Britain. But maybe you do one of these many, many things that are so sustaining the rest of us these days. And you're in this kind of hurry up mode. Many of us are very, very stressed. That's normal. How can you not be? But let's just imagine, using that image, that even if we acknowledge those things, and even if we're not driven by those things, let us remember that there are graces to be experienced in the moment. There are graces, by which I just simply mean gifts of the everyday. And many of us are mindful of these things. The ability to breathe. Those that are COVID positive, those that are in hospitals right now, may not be breathing very well. They might be on ventilators. So the gift of just being able to breathe and to remind ourselves of that gift is a good thing. So here's another image, just to kind of, again, put it in some context. Those of you that have been to a grocery store, let's say in the last couple of weeks, you're harried, you're stressed, you're thinking to yourselves, oh my gosh, I've got to get whatever, things my family or I need for these very trying circumstances. And you maybe are speeding through and, looking for where's the flour or where's the milk. And it can be a rather stressful experience. Now, I suspect, and if you're like me, maybe it takes a reminder to think about this. I suspect that many of us don't really, in those kinds of circumstances, think about the men and women that are stocking those groceries. So I just read a story today from the New York Times that talked about how stressed out grocers are and the staff of grocery stores, because they're trying their best, really doing an incredible public service and subjecting themselves to great risk in doing so. So, just maybe even in the midst of that stress, acknowledging there's somebody over there who is, maybe actually, subjecting themselves to risk by just providing my food. That's a good thing to be aware of. And again, this is not a question of, maybe what privileges we enjoy as individuals. It's just a recognition that we're all graced in whatever situation that we are in. So the prayer of Examen is a basic prayer of going over the past 24 hours and taking the time to note what is there that I didn't pay attention to, those roses that I just sped past, or, those, tons of groceries that I was just kind of furiously steering my cart through to find that one thing that I need. There are graces, so here I am in my backyard and I'm listening, and there's this lovely bird that's chirping, and there's part of me that says to myself, well, maybe I had to just pause the video and listen to the bird. All well and good. But here's the point. If you stop once a day, maybe it's before bedtime, maybe it's the first thing when you wake up, and simply acknowledge what are some of the things I may have rushed past in the past 24 hours and not acknowledged the goodness of. That is the fundamental prayer of Examen. Now, those of you that are operating maybe from a faith tradition can add a little piece to that, which is, these are ways that I can give thanks to God. These are ways that I can recognize my dependence. And we're all, I think, recognizing our dependence these days. And just simply acknowledge, God, here I am in these frightening circumstances. I want to thank you for the good gifts that are there to be found if I am willing to look. All right, so 2 points in conclusion. Number one, this prayer is just a way of recentering ourselves and finding ourselves, sometime in the midst of the day, to not get lost in that cascade of thinking and worry and everything that, blows through our minds on a regular basis. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if this becomes a habit, and I'm firmly convinced, by the way, having taught Christian spirituality for many years, I'm firmly convinced that spirituality is a practice. It's not, just like something that some people are good at. It's a habit that we develop. And I'm suggesting that the habit of this kind of prayer develops in us the kind of attentiveness that allows us to see the good in the moments that present themselves to us in the course of our day. So, even for those of us that are legitimately fearful that we may be in lockdown for quite some time yet, we needn't necessarily fall back on the, oh my God, everything's terrible. Maybe this is the opportunity to find some life within and acknowledge that there are goods that we've been rushing past for a long time, and we can now start to acknowledge them and even savor them and allow those to be opportunities for gratitude. So, thanks for listening. Again, my name is Tim Muldoon. You can look me up on the web or check out my books with Loyola Press. I can also recommend my audio lecture on Ignatian discernment and Ignatian mindfulness at Learn 25. Thanks for listening.